Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Christian Therapist Podcast. Lindsey Castleman here, and of course, joined by my fellow friend and licensed marriage and family therapist, Aron Strong.
Hey, Lindsay. I always love doing this with you. We always have great conversations. It's a lot of fun.
I know, and we have just come off of a marriage weekend that we did an intensive with, I think, the most couples we've ever had, which was kind of bananas.
It was good.
It was a lot of work, but it was awesome. I was reading to you this morning another survey that came in that, we always love reading those and just seeing how God moves in those weekends. And so, man, just grateful, just grateful. And then kind of that gratitude continues because man, I think a few weeks ago, I can't remember, but listen, my friend Mike Vaughn and I connected and we're just like, Mike, let's do the podcast together. Let's do it. And so now Mike is here with us. Glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. The way that really went was I heard about you guys' podcast and I was like, what? They have a podcast? That sounds
Yeah.
awesome. I wonder if I could beg to be on that. And so I'm grateful that you're letting me be here for
Oh
sure.
my gosh, Mike, you don't have to beg. Because
That's
I,
all.
I was telling Aaron earlier, I was like, man, Mike has come to speak to my staff team several times. I mean, you're a repeat offender because they're like, we want you back. We want you back. And so just always been so great. And, Mike, you are now over really the Bethesda workshops that are really close to the Nashville airport, which I was like, man, that's really convenient. People can
Very
fly
convenient.
in, go right there, or just from around here, come hang out. So, Mike, talk to us just a little bit about your role there at Bethesda.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm the executive director of Bethesda Workshops. And for any who are listening that may not know about us, we do essentially 4-day intensive group kind of workshops. And it's really focused around all the things related to sex addiction, pornography addiction, and then like on the other side of that are for partners and betrayal trauma. So we kind of cover the range. So we do that with individual workshops. We have couples workshops, and then we were talking before this started. We also have a teen workshop as well because you know sadly there is a need out there for the
Right.
teens to be addressed, but I think there's so much hope for teens especially, so we kind of try to cover the main pieces and parts related to that, and we do that in that intensive format so everyone comes to our facility in Nashville. And that's why being close to the airport is really helpful because you just
It
fly
is.
in, drive over pretty briefly, and then when they're there, just God does amazing work for those 4 days. I know you guys do intensive work, and so you've seen like how things can shift and change in such a short amount of time.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness, it's fantastic because there is a place of going. That's what Aaron and I used to laugh about. We're like, we have people trapped for they can't leave, but there's beauty in that because
Yeah.
we can also shut out distractions, we can shut out
Yes.
and we can just let people be cared for in that
Yes.
amount of time, which is transformational, and have that inward focus for that amount of time with support,
mhm.
which
Yes.
which is
Those
huge.
those two formats create such a different. They have like different roles. They do different things. Whether you're doing like a weekly ongoing traditional therapy versus an intensive
Mhm.
environment. I know we like to do both, but there's something about. I mean, there's like great help when you have ongoing help for weeks, months, years, right? There's someone who
Mhm.
walks you
Yes.
through that, but an hour a week, an hour every other week, that's just like slow progress, right?
It
There's just
is.
Yeah.
like there's a lot happens between sessions and how do I integrate and hold on. But when you can capture people, you get them in a room, and then you were able to keep them in that experience for that extended duration, that ability to kind of create safety, go deep, connect with what's going on. What do I do with that? All in an active experience. There's such a power that
Mhm.
happens. And so that role, I think, of intensives and ongoing support, I think they're complementary. I don't think they're in competition at all. It's
100%.
a great
Yeah, we
Yeah.
mix.
really see ourselves as a partner to
Hmm.
the clinicians that refer to us. I think wherever they are in their journey when they get to us, we hope that our process moves them forward. And then, like you're saying, Aaron, really it'd be so wonderful, wouldn't it, if like 4 days was enough for all of our problems, whatever we would bring. But I think, it requires the 4 days, but also then that ongoing work. So I think they dovetail perfectly together,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. Well, and Aaron, you and I were both telling Mike earlier that we have had clients that have gone to Bethesda workshops. And Mike, I think your work partner is a great word for that because that's how I felt as a clinician. I felt partnered with. And even if I remember correctly, I mean, once someone leaves, you get this plan, just as
Yeah.
a therapist, you get to know what they worked on, what they went through, even what other eyes and ears experience sitting with your client as well,
Mhm.
which was just so, so good and so, so helpful. Because, there's also, I'm sure places where you're in a group and that's just different
Yeah.
dynamics than you get when you sit with your client, just you and your client. And so it was
Yeah.
great to have just a bigger perspective too, as my clients left.
And then that
Yeah.
benefit that you guys do, just to jump in, just for spouses of like betrayal trauma, right? Of like an affair
Mhm.
or
Hmm.
active addiction or
Hmm.
acting out or porn or whatever, like that sense of an experience that's just for them, often that
Yeah.
gets neglected, they get unseen.
Mhm.
The best people offer is like we got Al-Anon, which is not exact. I mean, it's a great supportive thing that covers a lot of things. I don't want to talk about it at all, but it's not quite that same intensive experience of what do I do that offers. And so the fact that you offer that for the one who's struggling with the addiction, the one who's been hurt by that addiction, a couple thing where we work on that together, that model I think is so helpful and holistic to hold the whole family. Now with teens, I think that's just really, really awesome.
Yeah, we really approach our work from a systems perspective, which I know you guys probably do too. And just think of like, well,
Hmm.
you really can't, like, we all exist within community, in a community of system. It's just the way God created it. And so you can't like just do an isolated one thing and expect then the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing can get better from one person, but I think we try to be holistic in it because God created us as holistic, not only people, but
Hmm.
also as we bring that then to the communities that He's put us in, including our families. Like, we have to address all. I mean, there's no way God's not about addressing all things, right? Because
Right.
that's the way He created us. So we do feel like we need to do a good job of at least presenting the opportunity for the whole community to be addressed, for the whole system to be acted upon. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
we love that. And Mike, if you need Aaron and I to be your hype people, if you go to a workshop or, try to advertise, we can.
I'm
We'll
I'm making
flank
a note of
you.
that. Yeah,
Right, right. We will.
we're
We'll be like,
reaching back out to
listen.
you.
Right, right, right. Well, and Mike, a big reason too, that we wanted to talk more about this with you is because we really hope that with our podcast, it's reaching a lot of clinicians who really are trying to make sure that they show up in the room authentic to who we're designed, to who we're created to be. I have this belief that mental health and faith aren't opposites of each other. They actually are right here together. And so a big part of that for Aaron and I is that we want to help clinicians just conceptualize what's happening in front of them when they're sitting with a client, what's happening on the inside, how just really so we're not throwing a bunch of things against the wall hoping it would
Yeah.
stick, that we really can see and know what's happening inside, and that we don't look especially at addiction from the lens of that Bob Newhart skit where he just says just stop it.
I knew you were going to say that.
Just stop it. Right. Just stop that. Which sadly is a part of my story and how I looked at people until, God got a hold of my heart and showed me a lot more grace and love for people and compassion. Now I still have some judgment, so we're not gonna, that's
We're
not
still
all
human.
gone. But just being able to sit back and to help clinicians know, man, when someone's coming in with any sort of addiction, with sex addiction, with just this place of, man, maybe they've blown up their families, maybe they haven't yet, just how do you start to help those that work with clients at Bethesda, how do you start to help them see and understand just what's happening inside of us when addiction's present?
Mhm.
I think it starts with exactly what you're saying, which is really just the awareness that there are things happening inside us. I think, like in the quote unquote old days, whenever that was, and I'm sure I was part of that, but we didn't have the understanding even about the human body and especially about the brain that we have now, thankfully. And we still know just a tiny fraction of what, especially like how our bodies operate, but especially our brains. It's like really still the final frontier in so many ways, which, just, I mean, doesn't that just speak to the complexity of God's work? Like we have all these instruments and we do all these studies for all of these years and we still know just so little. But with what we do know, I have seen, even in the time that I've been a therapist for these 20 years and now at Bethesda as the director, I've seen a shift in the field in terms of just the just stop it method, which
Right.
unfortunately, I won't say much about that, but back in time, especially I think in a lot of churches and Christian circles, that was the approach. Like this is, if this is a problem, then like you cut it out, right?
Mhm.
And
And I don't
unfortunately, it feels like in the evolution, like nowadays, it's not, we don't go to stop it. We just go, what's wrong with you?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right? Like, what is
yes,
wrong with you? And I always tell clients or whoever, I'm like, that's the right question with the wrong feeling, right? Because what is wrong?
yes,
Something's wrong. Clearly something is wrong. Like to go be curious, like what's happening? But when we don't know, we don't have the information that you're about to share, like then that sense of, and even in clinicians, we're just like, who does that? What kind of person are like what the heck, right? We just kind of like throw them away or like have these barriers that prevent us actually from discovering what's going on.
Right.
I love that word curiosity. I think that that's what everything spins on. And I really, Aaron, what you're saying, it makes me think of that Gabor Mate quote. And he says, we shouldn't, about addiction, be asking why the addiction. In other words, what's wrong with you? We should be asking why the pain. Like, in other words, what's
Mhm.
actually driving the need to cope with this through addiction? And, there's so many unhealthy ways of coping. It's not just addiction. And
Yeah.
Right.
in all of our lives, we need to be looking at, well, in what ways am I not coping in the most healthy manner? But we need to then go deeper and say, but what am I coping for or against? Like, what is really going on at the root level?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that's why just stop it and other things don't actually work. And also why understanding even the neurochemical component of this is important, because not only are we usually dealing with the effects of trauma and other things, so that's like the spiritual and psychological part, but from a neurochemical perspective, we are working against our own bodies in so many ways, but not like our body is doing something wrong. It's doing what it's designed to do. But unfortunately, with addiction, we've hijacked that process,
Mhm.
that healthy process of relating to one another. And so we can get into that. But that's what it made me think, Aaron, when you said that. It's like we need to be curious about what is actually driving this. Because if we stop at just symptomatology, we're not, I think, being faithful to how God created us in complexity, but we're also just not very helpful either.
I remember when I worked for the church before I changed careers into marriage and family therapy, I had a woman that went to our church and she would work really hard on the addiction she'd have, and then she'd swap it out for a different one.
Mhm.
Right? It was like alcohol, it was drugs, and then it was alcohol, and then it was sex, then it was anorexia, and it was like she would just trade out, like she'd
Mhm.
conquer one, but then a new one would arise.
Mhm.
And that sense of like, this is clearly not about a behavior. It's about this yearning for something to do something else. And in the lack of like, if I conquer an addiction, I conquer the thing that I'm using, I'm still left with this wanting that is looking
Yes.
for something to fill it, and then it just finds something else to create a soothing or an escape. I like what you said in terms of like for or against, like what's in terms of coping skills, like something's
Yeah.
happening. I need something because I don't know how to live with whatever this is. So then that behavior is a function, not just a problem, right? It's a failed
Yes.
solution, like strategic family therapy, right? It's a failed solution to a problem. It's not the problem.
Yes. I
Mhm.
think that's precisely it. It's like having headache and taking your ibuprofen. And so the headache goes away temporarily, right? But maybe you have that in a repeated basis. So at some point, you should probably say, well, I wonder though, what's causing that? Like, what is
Mhm.
the root of this? And maybe because that might need to be addressed. And
Right.
addiction is very much that way. I think if we don't get curious to the level of, well, what's the driver? And how does it work even from a neurochemical perspective to recover from addictive things, then it's so difficult to do that for the long term.
As long as I have my coffee, I don't have headaches. It's great.
Right,
After
right.
this podcast, we'll talk about that, Aaron.
Actually, I drink tea. I don't drink coffee.
Oh,
But
okay.
Oh, I do. I
I
drink
drink
fancy
coffee.
coffee though. So yeah, yeah.
That makes it
Well,
better.
right, it does. It does so much better, so much better. So Mike, kind of start to help us a little bit, just with that place of what is happening, from that neurochemical
yeah,
perspective in the brain.
Yeah. You know, the thing to understand, I think, at its most core level about the neurochemical process, particularly with sex addiction, got to keep in mind the thing about sex addiction and kind of forms of sexually acting out, whether it's pornography or other forms, is that we call that kind of false or pseudo intimacy, right? Because it's sexual, even though it's within like under this umbrella of addiction, doesn't mean that it doesn't feel intimate to us, because sexual things are supposed to cause us to feel connected and bonding with another
Right,
human being.
right,
And so addiction doesn't change that part, but we know that it's really false, of course, or pseudo intimacy, because you really cannot have all the true intimacy without the risk, right? So in order to have intimacy, you have to have risk. The problem with sex addiction is that you actually, especially like with pornography, for example, you don't have to take a risk. You can feel some of those components neurochemically of connection without the risk that goes along with it. Now, you don't have the reward of the depth of doing it in the way that God created it. But I want to start there because I think that what happens with sex addiction from a neurochemical perspective is the same process that our brains go through and our bodies go through to bond and connect with another human being. Those are the processes that get hijacked with sex addiction,
mm,
which is super important to understand, because when you're looking to recover from that, you have to know, well, what I was talking about with kind of working against our own bodies. Well, after you do an addictive thing enough, you're actually like you have pre-programmed or reprogrammed at least your brain in some ways. And so your brain is going to work against you. It's going to resist your efforts to slow the process down, like to do it in a healthy way.
right.
And we can talk about all the processes involved, but I
Mhm.
think it's just important to note, like, there is no quote unquote addiction center in our brain. Like the same pathways that we use to bond with one another are exactly the pathways of sex addiction that get hijacked, which
Mhm.
makes it so difficult to extricate from the process.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's difficult too. Anytime that there's an addiction related to a normal process that we're supposed to engage in, right?
Mm,
Like eating. Not about alcohol, because we don't have to drink alcohol, but we have to
Mhm.
drink something, right? But when,
Mhm.
yeah.
when it comes to sex addiction, in a bonded relationship, especially within marriage, that sense of this person with whom I've committed my life, with whom we've done this deep work, with whom I'm supposed to have this like kind of unfettered transparency and vulnerability where I feel safe. Sex is a part of that of that bonding experience. But then when I have it in like, but then that can also activate desires or feelings because they're related then. This natural thing of
Yes.
expression of connection is now also connected to all these other things. So that seems like very complex when there's an addiction around a thing that's supposed to happen. It's not like you just don't the answer to sex addiction is to never have sex again. Like I
Yeah.
don't think that's the answer. But that's complicated then when there's like a lot of neuro pathways that have been reinforced over a long period of time about what that means, images that go with that, feelings or behaviors that go with that, risks that go with that. It seems very difficult.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think you're raising a critical point. I say this sometimes about sex addiction, and this is also true of food addiction, and that is your own body is creating the thing to be addicted to, right? Like your own
Hmm.
body is creating the quote unquote substance, which is different. It's different than alcohol, it's different than illicit drugs, it's different than things outside that are created that you then take inside. So when you're dealing with food and you're dealing with sex as far as an addiction perspective, you are dealing with that lever that's inside you, right? And unfortunately, of course, like with pornography and other forms of sex addiction, these days it's so much easier to kind of hit that lever and to get that hit or that high than it used to be, right? So there's a fastness, unfortunately, now in today's world with all the digital things that we have that we didn't used to have to deal with. And no
Hmm.
doubt, sex addiction has been there throughout all of the civilizations and all of history, but it was a different kind of a process than it is today, unfortunately, in most
Hmm.
cases, which makes it so much more difficult. And Aaron, to your point, the answer to sex addiction, if you're in a committed relationship, is to never have sex again. That's not what recovery actually looks like, right?
Right.
And so the good news is we don't have to do that, and we'll talk about that recovery process. But I think to start with, right, we're in the right spot because there's this complex process happening inside of us that then, of course, any of us, not just with sex addiction, but any addiction and other unhealthy coping behaviors, we can figure out how to game the process, right? Like we can figure out how to hit those levers to make it work.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
So within the best with Bethesda and the spectrum that you guys work in, is there a differentiation between abuse and addiction, or do those get blended? Like we're using something the way it's not designed to do versus an addiction. Often there's this perception of addiction is like it kind of removes all choice. Abuse is I'm doing something to alleviate or to use something in the way it's not designed, where addiction is something where it kind of takes control and chooses for me. I don't know if is that a framework that kind of fits with where you guys are?
Yeah, you can think of it like this. I think within those things that we may abuse, if I devote myself to stopping those things, I will probably stop those things if I'm willing to give it the right effort.
Hmm.
Um, with addictive things, I make efforts to stop, but they probably fail.
Hmm.
And so there is a spectrum, there's a gradient there between those two. And so you can abuse something without being addicted to it. But typically, and it's so hard sometimes to gauge whether something has kind of crossed the line into addiction. So we look at external factors to decide that. One of those being efforts to stop that fail, the amount of time you spend on a thing, how much hurt it's caused to other people. And all that can happen when you abuse something. And often if you're abusing it enough, it's going to probably be an addiction as well. But they're not necessarily the same. I
Yeah.
Hmm.
think for those who sometimes are abusing something, they are able to stop that. Or even if it's not abuse, even if they kind of feel dependent upon it in some way, but they make those efforts to stop and then they do. Addiction requires, this is what I think oftentimes Christians don't understand. Addiction requires significant work in all the elements that make us a human being in order to actually stop and to recover. And that's hard, right, to get your mind around. Like I have to address emotional, spiritual, cognitive, relational, physical, which is what we're talking about today. Like I have to take all the areas of me as a human, and every single one of those has to be addressed in order for an addiction to stop. I think things that are not addictive in nature, we still have to address them as a holistic person, but they don't require that kind of magnanimous effort that addiction recovery requires.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Which is difficult when it comes to language. We talk about substance abuse, but also addiction, and so they get conflated, and then it's hard to identify what's what. And then on top of that, when it comes to sex addiction, there's a whole segment of society that declares that's not even a problem,
Yeah,
right? It's all like you want to watch porn, just watch porn. Who cares, right? It's all fine. It's grown adults or whatever consent. So this whole like dynamic that must seem complicated also. That people who may have real struggles also kind of get these mixed messages often in society if that's even a
absolutely.
problem or not.
Absolutely. It's interesting to me as you look at our country, but not surprising when you look at our country and going back to you take sex, but you also take food, how much as a country we have colluded to try to normalize what is really addictive, right?
Right.
And we've done that for sure with sex, especially with pornography. And, there's a reason for that. People don't want to confront the fact that things might be addictive. It's like kind of the first step of the 12 steps, which is me admitting that actually this thing has power over me. We all want to think we're in complete control of everything, right? All of our world, the people in our life, and our own bodies. In reality, with addiction, we're actually not.
Mhm.
And in reality, we're really not in all those other areas either. But that's a different topic for a different day. But I think with addiction, we're actually don't have control over this thing. It has taken over.
Mhm.
Now, God doesn't leave us there, but it's important if you're going to recover from anything addictive that you recognize, wait a minute, in order to recover from this, I have to admit that as much as I'd like to be in control of this, like it's a hard, hard truth, but I'm actually not. And so if that is true, what then therefore do I need to do? And it's probably steps greater than what I've been willing to do so far. Like oftentimes Christians will approach this from the perspective of it's me and God, right? So I'm going to stop this with prayer and scripture study and he and I alone.
Right.
And I think that's a fantastic thing to do. It's just not enough
Right.
because God
Right.
designed us to be healthy only within our community where we're open and honest and vulnerable,
Mhm.
right? And authentic. And so it won't be enough to recover from an addictive thing to pray and to read your Bible. That should be your foundation, but you're going to have to do more than that, which is such a hard thing sometimes to get our minds around.
For sure, for sure. Well, and Mike, too, I do want for us to move into that direction. It will probably be in part two. Woo! Because we want to have you back.
That's right.
But before that, Mike, anything, especially if you were imagining just a new clinician in front of you, what would you really, really want for a new clinician to know about when sitting with a client that's coming in for sex addiction, coming in maybe with some kind of unwanted sexual behavior that keeps happening? What would you really want for them to know or to embody or to understand, just as they're sitting with this new client?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there are some foundational things if you're going to work with sex addiction that you have to help clients with. The first is, of course, their work with you is really important because at some point you have to get to those deeper places, right? I
Mhm.
say this to clinicians all the time. Any addiction work is trauma work, period. At the end of the day, even though Bethesda Workshops is, we do sex addiction recovery, right, and betrayal trauma. At the end of the day, we are a trauma workshop in so many ways because what we're really trying to address are those underlying things. Now, having said that, always with my clients, I'd say there are two phases to this work. There's phase one and phase two. Phase one is we have to help you be so supported that you stop the behavior because you can't keep doing the behavior and expect then to do the deeper work. Those are not going to work together. So there
Right.
is a bit of a linear element to the recovery work. And so for anyone out there, any therapist listening to this, if you have someone that first sits down in your office, the first thing is you have to support and educate them how
Mhm.
to stop the behavior. So those are things like the 12-step groups, Celebrate Recovery, Pure Desire, Samson Society, Bethesda workshops. Like there are a lot of places where you can go. And the things I mentioned before, Bethesda, are designed to be a fellowship of others who understand and are also struggling. And so you have that weekly support, which you have to have in order to do recovery well. Keep the time with you as the individual therapist. And for
Mhm.
some people, the reason we exist is that they really, they benefit from having a more intensive approach as part of the process. So phase one then is about getting a person into that recovery atmosphere lifestyle so that the behaviors stop or at least slow down so they can begin to have clarity about what's really going on.
Right.
And
Mhm.
then I say phase two is now let's look at what's really going on. What are the deeper components that are driving this? What are those probably core wounds that continue to get activated by this thing called life, right? This fallen world that we live in, that makes this really a behavior that's so difficult to stop if you don't do that.
That's
Sure.
such a different perspective too from like it's the opposite direction of most therapy, where most therapy is like, let's address this deeper issue, and then there's no need to have a behavior because we've addressed the underlying thing. So you fix the underlying
Yes.
problem, that function goes away. But in addiction, you can't because that thing is
Mm-mm.
so resilient. Like they almost won't even let you get down to those core wounds because something else is already kind of taking care of it. Right. And until we
Yes.
kind of like get rid of that soothing behavior, and then exposes the need of the vulnerability or what that wound is to be able to then get
Mhm.
down to the bottom post.
Yeah, and to think of this neurochemically for a minute, this is kind of language people understand sometimes is the idea of detox. This is the same with sex addiction, right? Like you have to let your brain rewire, like be reprogrammed, usually before you can see with great clarity what is that deeper piece, which is
Sure.
why, yes, Aaron, to your point, it really isn't the same approach as like our clients with the other things. We have to address the behavioral piece because behind all the behaviors is a neurochemical and a whole body experience that if I don't change that,
Hmm.
then it's going to be hard to see what's under there.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and Mike, too, one more question, kind of one last question
Mhm.
before we wrap. Anything else that you have discovered just neurochemically about how our brains wire, rewire, just with an addiction that you're like, man, this was fascinating to me, or this was something that really, kind of use a phrase like, well, you're nerd out about it. You're just like, ah, that's so cool. To just to figure that out. It's almost like it helps put language to why we do what we do, or language to why we might show up the way we show up. But just kind of anything that you have discovered about the way that we're wired that, man, really helped put things in place for you when it comes to addiction.
Yes. That I was saying earlier, the kind of the systems that get hijacked with sex addiction, and
Yeah.
really the main system is the reward system.
Mhm.
And what also gets activated is our threat response system, right? To say it kind of plainly. So, with the reward system, you're talking about chemicals we all understand: dopamine, oxytocin. You got norepinephrine in there. You've
Right.
got serotonin in there, right? Like these are the chemicals that day to day help us decide what to pursue, help us locate those things that are advantageous to us, help us bond with other people, like all of that.
Right.
That reward system is so fantastic when it's done in the slowness of a relationship. And I often say, like, sex is supposed to be slow in the sense of there's a rhythm and a dance to the process. And that's so important because what that does is it allows our brains to function in the way that they're supposed to. The problem with sex addiction is we speed up the process. So
Mm.
instead of going through like those relational components to be sexual, instead, now I'm just like hitting levers and clicking mouses, and the brain is now put on this super fast cycle. So the reward system gets sped up.
Mm,
Unfortunately, what that does then is it teaches and trains the brain that sexual things are going to be like dopamine, all that fast. So it actually impacts your prefrontal cortex.
sure.
The prefrontal cortex, as we all know, that's our executive function. That's the thing, that's the adult part of our brain that says, wait a minute, I wonder if this is the best idea, right?
Mhm.
Right.
And so, any of us with teenagers, we know like adult bodies, but not prefrontal cortex development all the way. And so they think later maybe that wasn't a good idea after they've already done the behavior. But for us as adults, we're like, your PFC is saying, but wait a minute, let's slow down and let's analyze the information we're getting back and make sure this is okay. Well, with addiction, what happens is you really train the reward system to not necessarily bypass, but to de-emphasize the prefrontal cortex. And so the brain then becomes like this super fast cycling process. And that actually damages the prefrontal cortex. So you talk about nerding out. So addiction is brain damage in this, not in the sense that it can't be recovered from and redone, but just in the sense that you have an impaired process and an impaired brain.
Sure.
Which, of course, I bet most listening aren't going to miss the insidiousness of this, right? So, like, as I do something over and over again in an addictive way, well, actually, because of the brain impairment that takes place, I am more likely, not less likely, to keep doing that thing. And that's how we get tolerance, because the brain eventually is like, we kind of are overwhelmed by this. Let's downshift. And now I need more of that thing in order to get the same hit. And this is true of all addiction.
Hmm.
So you get this complex multi-process thing going on. So I probably gave you too many nerdy things, but like those are the
No.
first things that come to mind when I'm thinking about, well, how does this work? Well, that's how it works in a kind of simplified form. Yeah.
I've never thought about, but like thinking of it in terms of brain damage,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm giving myself brain damage, by engaging in these things or doing these things or,
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah. It actually changes different structures in the brain.
yeah, which is
It really does, which
impacting.
people I think don't they think of it as this static thing. Well, I'm just doing this, and there may be a behavioral or relational impact, but that's not causing any adaptability inside me. But actually, the way God created us is to always be adapting
Hmm.
neurochemically and otherwise to our environment. That's a very amazing thing, right? It allows us to change as our environment changes. It's just not great when we grab the reins of that and we're doing that in such a way that, like, it's just not healthy.
And I could even see how that impairs people's ability to recognize it being a problem. Because when that's so
Exactly.
normal to be something
Hmm.
that's so soothing, that's just what I do, especially in behaviors that, if it's not, maybe if it's not having sex with another person, but if I'm, webcamming or I'm porn or I'm chatting, like, it's not a real person being impacted, then it's just a private personal thing. Like, then like what's the like you
Yes.
can't even see its impact or its function because it's just normal. That's what I do. So that
Hmm.
resistance to even recognize a problem is even present, uh,
Yes.
your own brain would fight against the acknowledgement, it seems.
It does. I think we are impaired and our thinking is impaired. And so, if you go back a few steps to what we were talking about, that's why, if you're a therapist working with addiction, you have to start with stopping the process.
Hmm.
Because until you do that, the brain's not going to rewire and then allow for that more reflective understanding of oneself, right? So that's how they connect together. So you have to have that part.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
Mike, I love that there's a place in there though where it's like you're going, but guys, there is hope.
Yes.
There's always hope. And just because maybe there is some brain damage, we've got some wiring that is not getting us the results that we want. It's actually destroying relationships instead of bringing relationships closer. We find ourselves more on an island, and maybe in some sort of shame cycle, or maybe we're just disconnected from how we feel in that way. But at the same time, what we know is that, and you tell me this, Mike, too, I would imagine that we start to notice either there's no relationships around us or the relationships around us are all suffering in some
Yes.
way. That we're either completely alone by ourselves, hey, I can do this, or we've got people that care about us that are just like, I can't get close to you. This is hard here, right? To start
Yes.
to listen to them because our thinking might not be online the way it should be.
Yes, that's really well said. Pure Desire in Barna did a research study a couple years ago now, and they published it last year on pornography. And it's everyone, I think, in today's world should take a look at it. But
Mm,
essentially, one of the things that of note from that study, there were many, was that I think it was 80%. We could look it up, but 80% of those polled said about their pornography usage, forget addiction, just usage of pornography,
sure.
80% said no single other person knew. Like, they were the only person that knew about it, right?
Hmm.
And so that's so telling, I think, Lindsay, because it layers in what you're talking about, which would be, well, if something wasn't creating shame, seems like I would talk about it.
Hmm.
right? Shame and or hurt to those around me if they knew, are those are the two drivers for the isolation. And we haven't said this explicitly, but addiction is a very isolating experience because most of the time, most people don't know about the addiction, especially that's true in sex addiction, but I think it's true in the others
Sure.
because we ourselves feel shame. There's no such thing, even if pornography is what you're doing in terms of acting out, there's no such thing as a victimless crime.
Hmm.
No such thing. Like when it comes to addiction, even just unto ourselves, there will be shame created. And we will, to your point, Lindsay, we will retreat further and further from our relationships because what does
Right.
shame say? You're defective. Whatever you do, don't open up, be vulnerable and authentic with these people because they will judge you as lesser and that will be really impactful and wounding. And so we retreat.
Right.
And then, of course, when the addiction is known, that's why we have a partners program because that's very traumatic usually for partners to experience. And usually, what's traumatic about that is certainly the behaviors, but more the line and the fact that they were living in a way that they didn't realize this was going on, and they
Hmm.
thought they were having this relationship, that
Right.
they were having this plus this over here
Hmm.
that they didn't know, and that's incredibly damaging and
Oh,
hard to
yeah.
go through.
Yes. Yeah,
I
completely.
love what you were saying too, Lindsay, in that larger perspective, as we're recognizing kind of all the different dynamics, the neurochemicals, the functions that go on, what lies beneath all these behaviors, is that sense of hope that from a theological perspective, God is a redeemer and a restorer. He loves
Hmm.
bringing dead things back to life. Our brain has the process of neuroplasticity. So the damage that we create in the brain is not permanent. Like though there's healing and restoration that even goes in that, like research and mindfulness and different ways we now know and
Right.
can measure, reducing amygdala size, increasing thickness of the prefrontal cortex. Like our brain is a dynamic machine that is always evolving and changing. And then even within relationships, interpersonal relationships, we can go from living alone and isolated to healthily connected. And that's something that God wants for us. But what makes it so hard is that we often want God's redemption and transformation to be miraculous, not
Mhm.
transformative, right? I
Sure.
Mhm.
just want to receive the goodness and skip all of the risk and pain of the process of transformation. Uh, but that's how God does it. God wants to be with us in that evolution, in that changing process, rather than just sprinkling, magic glory dust on you and suddenly everything's all good and fine and you don't have to do any of the hard work, right? He wants to do the
Hmm.
hard work with you. And then again, that personal interactive between me and him, me within myself and how I manage myself, me in the context of others, that trifecta of community then is what creates that safety and that distress tolerance and resiliency to push into these transformative experiences.
Yeah, yeah. Because God does not give us the easy button, which on the
Yeah.
outside, all of us are like, God, I wish he would. But then
Right?
when we slow that down, we go, no, because he does. He wants to transform us, like you were saying, Aaron. He wants to
Mhm.
be with us in the pain. And this is, Mike, if you're open to it, just kind of moving into part two, when we come back, would just really love to talk more about what you have found to be some of those maybe core wounds, those core places inside of us that can start to lead to this outward behavior that you guys address in Bethesda and that we also address in the counseling room. Does that sound like
Yeah,
a deal?
I'm happy to do that. And I think before leaving this section, I appreciate you guys bringing us to the hopefulness because the truth is there's so much hope in the
Yes.
recovery process, and God is never just leaves us. He's like, oh gosh, well that's a bummer, that's a huge problem, I wish there was some way out of it. I mean, there is a blueprint for the way to get through this,
Yeah.
and God in his wisdom has provided that for us. And so anyone listening to this, whether therapist or otherwise, I hope has hope about it because ultimately, of course, there absolutely is. There have been many who have done the recovery process, and they have a different brain and they have different relationships, right? And like that is so, so possible.
Yes, yes. Well, and Mike, too, how can people connect with you guys? What's the best location? What's the best way to connect with you all? So, like we said, we are more systems therapists. We want to look at everything from this place of, man, first, how do we, in something that leaves us very isolating, how do we now get others around us that aren't going to judge us like how I used to be, but who are going to come alongside and love and be with and walk them through these places. So, just having Bethesda as that resource, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is you can just go to our website which is BethesdaWorkshops.org, right? And we have all kinds of we have resources there for participants in our programs, but we also have a lot of resources there for therapists. We have articles and blogs and tests and all kinds of things that hopefully we try to kind of through the years curate information to have it in one place. And
Hmm.
it's not maybe exhaustive, but there's a lot there. So any therapist listening to this, if you go to our website, you'll see when on our resources tab, we have all kinds of things to help support therapists. Because listen, part of Bethesda's true mission is to be of support and help to those who are doing the day in and day out work, which is so, so difficult, I think, especially when it comes to addiction. So we want to be a resource for that. Anyone listening can go to our website. You can also reach out to me. I'm M Vaughn at BethesdaWorkshops.com. Pretty easy to find. So
Look at that. You're getting personal, Mike. I like it. You're like, you can go
that's
directly
okay.
to the
You can
executive
come
director.
straight, just
Ooh.
Right.
shoot me an email. Yep,
Right.
I'll probably regret that. No, I won't at all. I like interacting with people. And listen, having been a therapist for so long, I always appreciated, like you're saying, Lindsay, I always appreciated having the ability to interact with others. And what about this question? Or just like, do you know anything, any resource this way? And I would take advantage of that. So I certainly would hope to be a resource that way too.
Yeah,
That's
of
great.
course, because we are better together.
Yep.
Even as
Yes.
therapists, Aaron and I try to say this quite often on the podcast, but they're just as a place of like, we have to do our own work. We have to have our own community. We can't walk through these places by ourselves. And so we've got to model what we're also asking our clients to do. And so I think being able to have other friends to bounce things off of, to say, hey, help me, and just to have the humility to know we're not supposed to know all of the things. And it's being
Right.
in relationship with other people is how we connect and how we do work things out so that we can know more, which
Absolutely.
is fantastic. And so, somebody should take that name in relationship right there. It's a good one. Anyways, Mike, thank you for being with us
You're welcome. It was a
today.
pleasure.
And we are bringing you back for part
That's right.
two. So excited to
Fantastic.
have you come back.
I'm excited to be back.